Welcome back to a Mel Gibson podcast. And today we cover one of Ron Howard's best, Ransom. Today we cover Ransom from 1996, a remake from the 1956 classic Ransom, starring none other than Glenn Ford. The original was based on a radio play and later a series produced for television called The United States Steel Hour, and the actual title of the television show was, or the episode was Fearful Decision. This was aired in 1954. Now, obviously, this very old story went through some screenplay revisions. So the actual screenplay was done by Richard Price, wrote The Color of Money, wrote For the Wire, and of all things, wrote the video for Michael Jackson's Bad. His co-screenplay writer was Alexander Inyan, who only got 3 credits. So we must assume that Richard Price really got top billing here because he did most of the writing. This film was produced by Scott Rudin. You will know Scott Rudin from No Country for Old Men. He's a big Broadway guy. He has 17 Tony Awards. Brian Grazer, which is Ron Howard's steady producer. He produces all of his films. He won an Oscar with him for A Beautiful Mind, in fact. And there is B. Kipling Hagopian. Now, if that name does not ring a bell, he's a venture capitalist and a tech fund bigwig. So he was probably the money guy. And of course, this is a Disney film. This is a touchstone picture. As I said, directed by Ron Howard. Score and soundtrack done by none other than James Horner. Cinematography done by a name that is probably not very familiar to most people, but very familiar to me, Piotr Sobociński, who was actually the cinematographer for Kieslowski for his Trois Couleurs series, particularly Trois Couleurs Rouges, the red one, which is the best one, which is the best looking one. I can highly recommend anyone watching that trilogy because not so much story-wise, but in terms of how it was shot, it is a joy to watch. Now, of course, this movie has stars because this is a star-studded film. As is typical for movies that have a big budget, this was 70 million. 70 million in 1996 was a lot of money. So it stars Mel Gibson, who does not co-produce or co-direct or have any production involvement. He was just there to act. It stars Gary Sinise, who we all know from Forrest Gump and some other stuff, but mostly Lieutenant Dan from Forrest Gump. There's Brawley Nolte, the son of, who plays the son of Mel Gibson in the film. There's Rene Russo, who plays in a ton of films with Mel Gibson, 2 Lethal Weapons right off the bat, and she also stars in The Line of Fire with Clint Eastwood. Then there's Delroy Lindo, Liev Schreiber. Liev Schreiber is in it. You will know it from Ray Donovan. And if you haven't heard of that, then you have not listened to Katie from the Retro Made podcast. She is hardcore into Liev Schreiber and Ray Donovan. So give her a listen if you want to learn more. Donnie Wahlberg is in this movie. Evan Handler is in this movie, and so is Lily Taylor. Now, this movie did a ton of money. This movie was an immense success. As I said, the production budget was 70 million, but it raked in domestically, which means American market, 136 million, and internationally an additional 172 million for a total of 309 million. So that's a monster of a movie. As I said, the original adaptation of this film was in 1956. So it had sunk into the collective memory, as they say. So this movie felt relatively new, the story at least, a good premise to start a movie on. Mel Gibson knocked it out of the park in this one. This is arguably one of his best performances. He was nominated for a Golden Globe for it. Really does an outstanding job. He did most of the heavy lifting with the press. In it, he explains that at halfway through shooting, he had to have an appendectomy, which is interesting. That's usually not a routine procedure. That's usually an emergency procedure. So it's, well, I suspect that's why the action scenes with Mel feel a little off. Most of them apparently were shot post-production. In interviews, it is brought up that Mel is playing a Donald Trump esque figure. Mel explains that, well, yeah, he did indeed meet Donald Trump during shooting because this was shot in New York, which is one of the reasons why this movie is so expensive, I suspect. Um, all he says of Donald Trump is, yeah, regular guy, nice suit. This was 1996. This was way before Donald Trump became a, a reality show TV star and then a president and another and again a president and the great villain of American politics uh, to a now minority of the country. Mel does explain, yes, he does play a sort of self-made man who lives in a bubble, and that bubble, of course, is punctured as he's stripped down, and this movie examines how he behaves. He's asked, well, what's next? Well, after this movie, in fact, he's working with Richard Donner again for Conspiracy Theory, a movie I hope to cover in the future. Gary Sinise also did some press. Um, there was a lot going on with this part. Gary explains that there was some tension there because Gary was contracted for another project and couldn't say yes to this script. There were some elements in the script that he didn't like, so that's why he originally turned it down. Um, and originally that was because Jimmy Shaker, the character he plays, was a 55-year-old retired police officer, and um, he just done Apollo 13, and he was in line for another project, and that fell through. And when the other project fell through, that's when he was offered Ransom again. And apparently, in the meantime, Alec Baldwin had been cast. And the minute Gary Sinise became available again, they apparently canned Alec Baldwin, and Gary got the part. Yeah. Uh, Gary feels a little bad about it, but not all that much. This film got some great press and got really good reviews. Siskel and Ebert explain that Mel Gibson is the real reason you come to see Ransom. Again, he knocks it out of the park. They say, well, the rest of the movie falls short. The story is entertaining enough, but it's the rich performance of Mel Gibson that really gives a body to this film. They claim that better writing could have given it a more suspenseful ending. Siskel apparently concurs with this, but they do disagree on the ending. Siskel felt that the start of the movie, the kidnapping, how the child was in jeopardy, took him out of the movie completely. He felt that was very hokey, um, where Ebert just complains about the editing in the end. Now, Mel Gibson, during his press tour, laments that he quit smoking during Braveheart, but he's since started up again. But he jokes that if you don't smoke, you can't quit. And then he sticks the cigarettes behind his ear. Typical Mel. Apparently, this movie creates a very vocal audience. Mel explained that that's because it's a dilemma flick. Um, the audience have to ask themselves a lot of questions because they are faced with a lot of dilemmas where they have to decide for themselves, what would I do in that situation? He's asked, well, how did you get the feeling across for losing your child? And Mel tells this harrowing story about how his 2-year-old took a walk out of a drugstore he was in and took a step off the curb. And when he finally noticed her doing it, he burst through the place, pounding over people to get to her. And that emotional memory has riveted that moment in his mind, and he drew on that during filming, and it shows. Um, Mel praises Ron for taking a lot of risks and trying new camera angles and tricks. Well, he had a great cinematographer, let's put it that way. This is, of course, after um, Braveheart got 5 Oscars and he won 2 of them. So when he praises a director, that means a lot. Delroy Lindo plays the FBI agent, and he also did some press, and he looks at it from the hostage negotiation perspective, and that is established that the kidnapper is constantly actually two steps ahead of the FBI, which raises the stakes and makes his character think that there's obviously very professional criminals behind this caper. He says, well, my character is procedural and reactive, whereas Mel's character is actually proactive, which is a kind of interesting juxtaposition. And you see that throughout the movie, that's very much Ron Howard's style in this film to balance these things out. You see a lot of pro and cons. You see a lot of balancing out, especially in the screen time that the kidnappers, the perspective from the kidnappers versus the perspective of the victims, which is not just the son in the custody of the kidnappers, but also the parents dealing with the FBI and with other stressors. An interesting tidbit that Lindo apparently learned was that FBI agents, he worked with several, preparing for his part, actually put their fingers inside money cases so that they can later identify the actual suitcase the money was carried in. Rene Russo also chimed in. She confirmed that Ron Howard actually didn't want her for the part, that Mel, in fact, forced him to speculate why Ron Howard was so reluctant. Rene Russo and Ron Howard went to the same high school, which was Burbank High. This was during a time when Ron Howard was already extremely popular, was already a television star. Of course, he was in Happy Days and he was on Opie, and so he was the hip guy in class, whereas she was sort of shy and withdrawn. And apparently, she left high school early. She cites this as well. Maybe Ron just thought that, if I quit school, I'll probably quit his movie. Who knows? Ron Howard himself states that this movie was very much a departure for him. He had never worked on a crime drama. Of course, he was an award-winning director by then. Howard particularly was very worried about what he called the rhythm of the movie, the timing of it, which does show. He did a lot of work with Steadicam, which is typical because his cinematographer was an expert. But he does shift a lot between Mel and Kate's perspective, which is an interesting thing to watch when you're watching this movie. That I urge you to make a note of this, is that that does indeed happen. Every time we see Mel leave with money bags to try to free his son, that is from the perspective of his wife, and vice versa. When his character, Mel's character, returns, you see the Mel's perspective and how his wife reacts, which really strengthens the drama and the emotional toll this takes on those two characters. And that makes for a much better movie. They test shot a lot because they had a ton of money. And so they would test on rehearsals, shoot everything on videotape, have that cut, and then see how it would look. And that's how Howard managed to keep all the balls in the air. Major difference in how the actors on set worked. Mel is a goof, as we all know. He horses around a lot. And it's typical in movies where he plays a dramatic, emotional character. He gets funnier and funnier, and I think that's probably one of the ways he deals with the stress he is under to bring out that kind of performance. You can tell from their energy that both Lindo and Gary Sinise, who in some ways are Mel Gibson's character's foil in the film, work very differently. They're stage actors, and you can tell. And I suspect that's one of the reasons why we're able to hold the suspense so long and for so many twists and turns. So without further ado, let's just get into this film and see what makes it tick. Now, the opening shot is a little weird. You see an ambulance drive through the New York streets. Images are desaturated. This is 1996. That wasn't done a lot. The really the first desaturation was for Save It Private Ryan, which would premiere a few years later. We see a bunch of people at a cocktail party, and they're called in. At this party, there's a videotape playing, and this is actually the launch of a commercial for an airline, and it is centered around its founder and owner called Tom Mullen, and that's Mel Gibson's character. Um, they portray him as a self-made man, as a somewhat of a maverick. The company's called Endeavor. Well, you have to name your company something, and it does sound okay as an airline, but still. So in the establishing shots, we see his son Sean sneak peeks at him. And Daddy's busy. He's hosting a party for his stakeholders. Everybody's, of course, patting him on the back. But what's established is that his son adores his father and that they apparently have a close bond. Then the mood shifts. We see a bed with handcuffs. You see a hostage room being built. And then we see a woman in the catering staff back at the party, and she has this visible neck tattoo. And Sean notices this. Creepy mob guy, played by AJ Benza. He's the guy who plays the promoter for Mason Dixon in Rocky Balboa. He now plays a sleazy reporter. This is something he is in real life, in fact, because he works for tabloids. He actually got into Rocky Balboa by um, uh, fixing some little scandal Stallone was in. In return, Stallone did him a favor and cast him in Rocky Balboa as a sleazy boxing promoter. So, sleazy reporter asks him about bribery allegations. This is how we are introduced to the problems that Tom Mullen faces. He's in a very difficult line of work. So next up is a father-son moment where dad is he's tickling Sean, and then the kids get serious, and he asked about the reporter. Was that man mad at you? Seems like somebody's always mad at you. So that kind of sets up that Tom Mullen, he's got some enemies. And then we get a cutscene of an arrest by a police officer, where a detective warns the officers to take it easy on the guy they're arresting. And we see the sleazy reporter get in some rape van and leave. And the detective notices this van pass by, and at that point, he just seems like a observing police officer. There's really no reason why we would suspect him of everything, but somehow the music does gives us a sense that this is a guy we should pay attention to. Next up, we see that Tom Mullen's wife, Kate, she's asked to speak at an event. I think it's some kind of science fair thing. Their son, Sean, wants to know why he can't enter. They say, well, it wouldn't be fair. In reality, it just would look bad. It would look like favoritism. So their kid can't enter the science fair. You can enter any other science fair. He's playing around while their parents are at a social function again, and they're being stalked, and this time by a man with tattoos on his fingers. Now, this is 1996. Tattoos during that time still mean you're scum, and it's a tip-off that you're the bad guy. These days, I'm the only human on the planet left without a tattoo, so that is relatively meaningless. But if you're in 1996 and you have a tattoo on your neck, it's bad news. Now, mom notices her kid playing with his remote balloon. He's got like this balloon thing with a camera on it. It's kind of like a drone. And the bad guys are closing in on him. And at some point, he's snatched, and you see that balloon slowly spiral away. Mom starts to notice he's gone. Dad starts to notice he's gone. They start scanning the crowd. Tom asks to be excused, and he's just frantically calling his son's name everywhere. The mother starts calling the name of the kid over the PA. Father reaches the the down drone, and right then the van with presumably the child inside passes right behind him, and you can actually see Miles, which is Evan Handler's character, looking over at him with a worried face. Interesting editing there. So at home, they're starting to look at the footage of the drone, and then the phone rings, and Tom is told he has an email. There are images of their son cuffed to a bed. It looks pretty gruesome. A disguised voice gives them instructions. And next we see the girl with the tattoo on her neck from the catering service, and she's force feeding Sean something, but he spits it out right on her shirt, and that pisses her off. Her husband is actually the van driver. He's played by Evan Handler, as I said. That's the little bald guy from Sex and the City and Californication. And they establish him that he's a raging alcoholic. Back at the homestead, Kate blames Tom. She orders him to call the FBI, and they argue about it, obviously because he's been under scrutiny and under investigation. So he's like, well, those people aren't going to help us. So finally he agrees, and next we see the FBI hostage negotiation team show up, disguised as fake contractors. This is already set up because the apartment is under construction. Now, Tom shares his suspicions with the FBI that this must have something to do with the payoff allegations. He was under investigation, and ultimately a mobster called Jackie Brown was put in jail partially because of him. So this man must have a motive. And so the FBI, in the form of Agent Lonnie Hawkins, they shut him down and tell him, just chill out. But there's a problem, because this is not a couple that can chill out. These are not chill people in crisis situations. That's obvious. Of course, then the phone rings, and the FBI preps him before he picks up the phone, but it turns out it's just the secretary. So Tom at that point says, well, isn't my son already dead? And the FBI said, look, never think that way. So, of course, we switch perspective to the kidnappers again. Now, one of the kidnappers is called Cubby Barnes, played by Donnie Wahlberg. He's taking care of the child, and the child is blindfolded, and he's making a joke. And the girl, Maris, played by Lily Taylor, notices this and starts to berate him for it. He shouldn't get too close to the hostage, etc. And we see kind of the dynamic happening between the kidnappers. The brother of Cubby, Clark, gets into the argument, saying, yeah, you have nothing to say to my brother. And he warns him, look, ease off on this thing, because he might be making bets in a burning house, which I thought was a nice sentence. So what they're basically saying is that whether his parents pay or not, they're probably going to kill the kid. So at some point, we see Tom admitting to the FBI agent that those bribe allegations he was denying and he was investigated for and got off with, that they're actually true. He did bribe people, and so the guy who went to jail probably went to jail for nothing. But he says, look, did Jackie Brown take my son? And so the FBI guy says, well, you want to go ask him? So the next scene, we see Mel waiting for Jackie Brown to be brought out of his jail cell. Jackie Brown is played by Dan Hedaya, who we all know and love as Arius from Commando. And I always love it when he gets a part. And so Jackie Brown just sees Tom and says, well, I've been thinking about you. And Tom, of course, goes into his, well, where's my son? And Jackie Brown typically denies involvement. At this point, we already know or suspect that Jackie Brown has nothing to do with it because, well, why would he? But you never know. So at some point they get into it, and this Jackie Brown guy, who is a mobster, jumps over the table and punches him and screams, hey, I got 6 kids of my own, which he won't get to see because he's in prison. And then we're back with the kidnappers and Donnie Wahlberg, Cubby. He's in a convenience store and he's buying stuff for the kid. And we see the detective again, and he's squeezing some small-time crook, and he sees Donnie buy stuff. And so we're thinking, well, maybe this is like the detective that's gonna, foil the crime, that's gonna find the kidnappers, that's gonna, save the kid. And so he starts following Cubby. And at some point, he walks into the house where the child, where we know the child is held, and he sees him on a bed. Music is played loudly to drown out all noise. The child's cuffed and blindfolded. And so the next thing we see is Detective Jimmy Shaker. He takes his gun out and puts it at the temple of one of the kidnappers. And he asks, why is a known scumbag asking for candy at a grocery store in plain sight of the police? And so he warns him, don't be stupid again. And this tips us off that this detective is probably the mastermind of this kidnapping, and the plot thickens. Now, Detective Jimmy is banging the girl. He has a relationship with Mary's, and apparently therefore cucking his co-kidnapper Miles, the van driver, and he also has some other gigs. And she's telling him about her dream, and she has daddy issues, and so he takes his clothes off and gets in bed with her. And while I'm watching, as I'm watching this, I'm thinking, why is he naked? Why isn't she naked? I mean, she probably looks better than he does. Gary Sinise doesn't look like he works out at all, which is, there's a reason why I'm saying this. More on this later. Now, she's complaining mostly about the other crooks. They're all wacko. And she said, look, we should just kill the kid, get this over with. Um, and he basically lays down the law. He's basically establishing dominance and says, no, 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 no. Look, we'll kill the kid when the time comes. And then the kid is his problem, not hers. So stop thinking about this. And then he bangs her. So meanwhile, Tom is going through FBI files of his own investigation because they're in hopes of finding some kind of connection to the kidnappers, but they don't really find anything. And then the phone rings. And it's Jimmy on the other end of the line, but he's using a voice scrambler, so we'll never know. And Tom, of course, has been prepped by the FBI, so he starts rattling off questions with so they can somehow determine where the child is being held. And typically, the detective sees right through those questions. So it's cut short. They're saying, "Look, you need to shut up. If you want to see your kid again, you go to 96th Street, and you better come alone." And so he asks, Tom hangs up and he asks the FBI, look, did you get anything? Did you triangulate? Did you find them? I mean, they have all kinds of equipment in his house. So you'd expect them to find them. But apparently, Lonnie, the FBI agent, says, well, no, they crashed the computer. Huh? What? They crashed? How? How? This is 1996. We do see Miles, the raging alcoholic, on the laptop or on some computer at least. And so he's a hacker, really, in 1996 with barely any internet. Maybe it was easier then, who knows? But by a, a bald alcoholic little dude who looks like he's in his early 30s, really? Anyway, so Tom says, look, I want to bring the cash instead of the FBI double. They had an FBI agent who looks like Tom, but he says, no, I want to do it. And meanwhile, we switch perspective to the kidnappers as they're gearing up. The pickup guy is given a gun. Um, and so Donnie Wahlberg's character, Cubby, promises Sean, look, it's going to be over soon. He's going to get him back with his parents. And we hear Sean mumble something. Now, Lonnie, meanwhile, warns Tom that, these men sound really professional. Really, Lonnie, you think so? Anyway, so Kate tells her husband to get their son back, and he speeds off in his Bentley. And this is the switching of perspectives that I referred to earlier. You see a lot of it. There's a lot of intercutting, not just between the kidnappers and the victims, but also between the protagonists and antagonists within these groups, which makes for a very rich form of storytelling, and it's just very interesting to follow. Because it's less dialogue heavy than you would suspect. Now, Tom is followed by a helicopter, and the kidnapper's calling him on his phone in the car. And he is told to get off at an off ramp at 125th Street to go to some rec center called Casarda. He finds it, and then they tell him, okay, so there's a key at the bottom of the swimming pool, and he has to dive in with his clothes. Obviously, they know he's wired, and diving into the water will kill the wire. He has 7 minutes to do this in, so it's a race against time. Meanwhile, the FBI is trying to find the hacker, but they fail. So Tom jumps in the pool, he gets the key, gets out soaking wet. They tell him put a hat on and put overalls on, and he has to go downstairs and put money into bags. And he walks out and he has to get into this crappy car instead of his Bentley. So basically, the FBI is still tracking the suitcases at this point, and the kidnappers have effectively separated the FBI from Tom. It's brilliant. And none of this is done with exposition. It's all shown. That's how you make movies, folks. That's how it's actually done. So in the car, radio goes off, and Tom only notices it when he hears Jimmy over the radio saying, "Pick me up, asshole." So the first thing Tom asks is, "How's Jimmy?" Asks Jimmy how Sean is, and Jimmy says, "Oh, he's having the time of his life." Kind of like really heavily sarcastic, kind of cop sarcastic, which to me should have been picked up on more. But so Tom starts asking, "Look, why me? Why did you pick me?" And he says, "You? Well, you buy your way out of trouble, don't you?" And he starts explaining, "Well, I saw you on TV and I looked into your eyes and you're a liar. You're a lying ass dog, pal." So here's a guy who is trained to see through this kind of stuff. Those are all clues. Tom starts to realize that for this kidnapper, this is a lot more than just about ransom. Now, meanwhile, we see the B group, the other kidnappers who are supposed to pick up the money. They're leaving on a quad, and so Cubby's handed a gun by his brother, and he warns him that look, if we're gonna kill this kid, I'm just not gonna do any of this. And his brother goes, yeah, yeah, yeah. So next scene, we're back in the car with, or the two cars really, Tom's car and Jimmy's car, and they're talking over the phone or the CB or whatever, the radio. And so Jimmy goes into this weird. So Jimmy gives off this monologue about Morlocks and Elons. It's kind of confusing. Basically, it's about haves and have-nots, and this kidnapper has a severe chip on his shoulder. He might be nuts. So he says, well, sometimes the Morlocks snatch an Elon, and the Morlocks are cannibals. And Jimmy questions himself: is he a Morlock or an Elon? Because obviously he's a cop, so he's actually an Elon, but he's also a crook, so he's obviously a Morlock, and he wants to eat the rich people. So it's an eat the rich kind of thing. And Tom, meanwhile, is trying to find him in traffic. And of course, Jimmy's onto this, and he says, you on the move again, Tom? And so he tells him to take the exit, and all Tom wants to know is, how do I get my boy back? And so Jimmy says, look, we're just going to swap. We get the bag, and we'll give you the address. Now, Tom takes the off-ramp. There's some big quarry or some building site, whatever it is. Tom is watched through night vision, and we see a quad roll up, and the kidnappers demand the money. Like, give us the money, give us the money. And Tom says, yeah, fine, just give me the address. And it's Cubby. And Cubby reacts surprised. He has no clue. He hasn't been, briefed. So he has this shocked reaction, and Tom gets pissed. And then a police helicopter suddenly shows up, bathes everything in light, and warns everybody to put their hands up. And the next thing we know, Cubby is off with his ATV, and Clark is tracking him with night vision, and the helicopter starts chasing him. Tom starts running through the quarry. It's kind of confusing. The detective in Jimmy sees the helicopters and sees what's going on, and he just drives away. Obviously, this situation is screwed. So the kidnapper on the ATV makes a run for it. The SWAT team deploys. Donnie starts shooting at the cops. So the SWAT team retaliates, and the sniper kills him. And his brother Clark takes off, and the SWAT team starts pulling Tom off the kidnapper as he's trying to get Cubby to uh, tell him where his son is held. And Tom's basically saying, "Look, you just ruined any chance of finding my son. You killed my son." And so back at the homestead, Tom and Kate are freaking out against the FBI team. News of the kidnapping has now hit the media because you really can't hide a police chase with helicopters in the middle of New York. And the kidnappers, meanwhile, are arguing because, Cubby is dead and his brother is pissed and he wants to call his mother and he's sad. And now he also knows he's fingered. So he says, "Look, I just want to get the hell out of here." And they're saying, "Well, no." And so he goes to the kitchen and he grabs a knife out of the drawer, and because he wants to slit the kid's throat. And right at that point, Jimmy, the not very worked out, not very in shape detective, uh, just hits him right in the throat. And this guy's like twice his size, and it's just over. And so he's again establishing dominance. He does that constantly. He just controls this group of kidnappers with will of iron, kind of like a cop who's controlling criminals. That's really what he's doing. And he starts explaining to them, "Look, this kid's going to die, but he's going to die when we don't need him anymore." And so we're back from the Mullen's perspective, and Tom starts thinking out loud about the situation. And he says, "Look, the kids are going to kill my son." And of course, the phone rings, and Tom just tells Jimmy, "Look, my son is dead. Go to hell." They're saying, "No, he's not dead." They give him a little proof of life. And so Kate starts believing in the situation again. And so Tom says, "Look, if this is going to work, then I'm going to have to go alone." So they pull a subterfuge. Basically, they have the double go in the Bentley, and Tom goes into another car in the other direction. But there's still one uh, film truck that is still following them. So at a traffic light, Tom gets out of the car, grabs a crowbar from his car, and he just blasts the window and takes the keys and throws it out the window. Interesting. Um, and then still waiting, and he's watching himself. He's watching footage of his son on TV. His gears are churning. He's starting to think. And so he gets Jimmy's on the phone again. He says, "Look, change your plan. You turn on channel 2 in another 2 hours, and you'll see what's going to happen." So in the meantime, Tom goes on the air, and then we get the famous scene. So Tom explains to the audience, "My son was kidnapped 3 days ago." He shows off the ransom, which is $2 million. He's spread out on the table in front of him. And he's now talking directly to the kidnappers. He says, "I'm not going to pay a dime. Instead, I'm going to take this money. I'm going to offer it as a reward on your head. So, do you know anyone who wouldn't turn you in for $2 million?" Now, of course, he turned the tables on him, and nobody's happy. So his wife isn't happy, and the FBI thinks this is a disaster. And Tom just says, "Look, I had to do it. He had to reassert control." Um, Meanwhile, Jimmy finds out that the other kidnappers have taken Sean to the woods because they're going to kill him. And so Jimmy follows them, beats them all up, and he just gets pissed and says, "Look, this is my show." And meanwhile, the FBI is complaining to Tom and complaining to Kate and saying, "Look, we've had 4,000 calls. There's been no leads. This is useless. Walk this back because otherwise you'll never get your kid back." So at some point, this is turning into uh, not just a test of will, but also a test of wits. It's turning into a chess game, and it's really Tom versus Jimmy. And Jimmy figures, why not go through the wife? So he sends a leaflet to to the cleaning lady, who gives the message to Kate, who says, "Come alone and come here, come to this church." And he shows up with a switchblade and he beats her up. And he's basically saying, "Look," and he gives her this bloody T-shirt because he'd cut Sean, so he'd get a bloody shirt to scare her. Tom gets pissed, and he grabs the bloody shirt and he walks out of the apartment and he goes downstairs to where the media is camped and basically has another statement. He says, "Okay, um, I'm doubling the reward. It's now 4 million." And so Jimmy sees this and he just freaks out. And when he reaches the apartment where Sean is held, he sees that Maris is leaving, and he asks, "Hey, where are you going?" And so they're all leaving. They're packing up. And Jimmy calls Tom, and they get into a fight over the phone. And this is probably the best call they have because they really let each other have it. It's really, really tense. Meanwhile, after Jimmy hangs up, he makes a decision. He thinks, well, okay, the jig is up. So what he does is he starts shooting his co-conspirators. He starts shooting the kidnappers as if he's a cop. In the meantime, we see the despondent parents and supporting each other, but they're crumpled into a heap. And juxtaposed, there's the kidnappers, and Jimmy's killing them off one by one. Even kills his girlfriend. But she does get a shot off, so he's wounded. So he's called in for backup, and you see police cars speeding to the crime scene, and you see um, Agent Lonnie informing Tom and Kate, "Hey, something's going on." The police find the place where Sean is being held. They find Jimmy bleeding next to the bed. He identifies himself as a police officer, and now he's the hero. And they bring both the child and the police officer to the hospital. And Tom and Kate have their child back, who is now obviously traumatized. You see a scene where he doesn't want the lights turned off. He's now become afraid of the dark. Makes sense if you've been, if you've had duct tape over your eyes and you could have been killed, you could be killed any moment. That does tend to traumatize people. Then we see Jimmy home from the hospital and he's booking a one-way ticket. And because it's obviously it's only a matter of time until they start connecting him to the kidnapping, because the mastermind is still at large. And so Jimmy shows up at the apartment, and even though he was supposed to be there on Monday, not on Friday, but hey, he was hoping to do it now, and it's could we just and Tom's like, "Hey, yeah, fine." So he gets out his checkbook, and this is where it gets interesting, because this is where Jimmy can't help himself, and he starts asking personal questions, like the obvious question, like, "Hey, well, why didn't you pay the ransom?" And so Tom says, "Well, I would have, but I was dealing with human garbage. Um, I knew they were not going to stick to the deal. If I'd been confident that would have gotten my kid back, I would have paid 10 times as much." And at this point, the child, Sean, recognizes Jimmy's voice, and he starts to piss himself. He visibly pisses himself. You see it dribbling down his leg. And um, this is the part where Siskel and Ebert start complaining about the ending, where there's a lot of over editing, and I tend to agree. There's a little bit on the nose editing. I mean, it's obvious that the child recognizes as Jimmy, and um, Tom has to make the connection as well, and they kind of draw this out too much. And so at some point, Jimmy pulls his gun out, and he just says, "Hey, this check is bullshit, Tom. You're a lying motherfucker." And so, Jimmy's obviously pissed at the human garbage thing. He's a Morlock, and he's an Elon, and all kinds of stuff. That whole thing is playing out now. And so he has the gun, and now he wants to pontificate. So, Jimmy starts to complain, "Hey, I took a bullet for this." So Tom says, "Look, I can just wire it to your bank. I can just wire it to you, and then you have a head start." And so Jimmy says, "Well, just call the bank then." He says, "No, no, no, no. It's you have to go. We have to go to the bank to do this. You can't just do it over the phone. It's $4 million." but you'll have 4 million bucks and whatever you, or you have whatever in your pocket. But either way, either if you kill us or not, you're going to be on the run. But if you want, I'll give you 4 million bucks and I can fly you out myself. And he says, look, you can still win this thing. And Jimmy's like kind of like swayed by this argument. And he says, I can still get to you. I can still get to your kid. And, at some point, someday, they're still playing chess with each other. Someday it's going to be, is today Jimmy Shaker Day, that kind of thing. So they go to the bank. They are recognized, right outside the bank by other cops. And it's like, hey, it's Jimmy. And of course, he's famous. And so everybody's happy. And even in the bank, he's recognized. And everybody wants selfies. And you know how that goes. And so they wire the money. And just at that time, Jimmy's, of course, wearing his police radio. An APB goes out on him. And obviously, because Sean and Kate have warned the FBI, etc. The whole thing goes nuts. Jimmy starts shooting. He kills the police officers trying to arrest him. And Tom suddenly starts tackling him and starts beating him up. And Jimmy kicks him, and he gets run over by a cab. And this is kind of, you know, so they start chasing each other. And at some point, Tom throws Jimmy into a furniture store, of all places. And then the cops converge on the store, and Tom somehow gets his hands on the gun. And so the police start threatening him to, drop the gun. And then they start warning Shaker because he's going for his ankle piece. At that point, the Agent Lonnie and Tom both shoot Jimmy. And that's the end. And then cutscene end scene with the desaturation, and that's basically the story. And so, yeah, okay. Exciting movie. Great suspenseful thriller. You really don't see the all the twists and turns coming, so that's really well done. My main gripe is that they never established that Tom Mullen is like this amazing fighter. I mean, okay, you have to think of him as like Donald Trump or somebody. So apparently he can fight too. And this Tom Mullen can fight like an alley cat, and he can shoot like a Navy SEAL. Because it's I don't know if you shot guns. I have, and it's not that easy to hit the target, and it's even harder to hit a moving human person. Mel had suffered an appendicitis, and he was far from a physical specimen at that point. Gary Sinise, again, is established as this tough guy, as a guy who can control situations, who is very physical, very dominant, can just beat people up. But he really doesn't look the part. And so I have to admit, at the end, really robbed me of my suspension of disbelief. Now, I mean, this is an action hero podcast, part of an action hero podcast network, and so I don't know about you, but I like my action heroes to be a little bit more credible, and I don't know, I could have used a little bit more establishing of all this stuff. But that's really the only grab I have about this. This is an excellent movie. The acting is fantastic. The direction was great. Cinematography was great. The music was great. This is just tremendous. Um, Editing could have been a little better, but still, great movie. And if they hadn't fudged the ending, I would have said it was a perfect movie. But alas, perhaps the next one will be. So until next time, bye for now.